Hi, everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of Humanities Cafe. My name is Stacy. I'm with the South Dakota Humanities Council, and today we are going to talk about a big issue throughout South Dakota and the nation. It is Human Traffic Awareness Month here in the month of January, and I am honored to have two guests with us for us today. Um, One of them has not yet joined the group because she had a little bit of a technical difficulty, but I am honored to have with us first of all, Lily Mendoza, who is a 2024 Bush Fellow and the founder of the Red Ribbon Skirt Society. And so while we wait for Tanya Grassel-Krietlow, who's our other guest, to come on, I'm going to have Lily introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what she does.
Well, Happy New Year. Merry New Year. I was kind of confused. Happy, Merry. I kept on getting a lot from Facebook. I was like, which is it? But anyway, good morning. And again, Lily Mendoza. I'm an enrolled member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, and that's where I grew up. And I've been living in the Black Hills and Spearfish, Rapid City for 35 years. And this is where I've raised my children, grandchildren, and probably my great grandchildren here down the road. I'll be doing that as well. And I founded the Red Ribbon Skirt Society in 2016, just out of, I guess, the need and curiosity, I guess, what MMIW was all about. And I started doing some research on that and felt that I needed to be involved in that movement, in that crisis across the state of South Dakota and beyond. And so that's how I did get started with MMIW. And then eventually it grew into MMIP, Missing and Murdered Indigenous People, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives, all of that being very all-inclusive. Although we really do focus on MMIW, we just feel it's really important for us to focus in on the women for sure. And so I live here in Rapid City. I have 5 children. I have 11 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. And we kind of talked about being the recipient of the Bush Fellowship. And so that happened this past 2024, and which has allowed me to really kind of focus on myself in the area of healing. Because the work that I really do with MMIW, it kind of takes a toll because you're always living in that world of death and dying and grief. And so when I put together my Bush Fellowship, it was really critical for me to take a look at how I was going to heal as an individual in order to help those families heal as well. So that's a big part of my Bush Fellowship. And most recently finished walking the Chief Bigfoot Ride, which I walked, and just finished up on Christmas Day. And I had some of the MMIW families start out with me and walked with me the last mile, 7 miles to Wounded Knee. So that's what I'm doing. That's who I am.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Lily, and congratulations on the Bush Fellowship. I'm looking forward to seeing what you're going to do with it and what we can
Right.
see coming out of the Red Ribbon Skirt Society. We do have Tanya with us now. So, Tanya, if you don't mind, I'm going to have you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Good morning. I'd like to apologize. My stuff did not switch from Mountain Time Zone, so I just got back from the Black Hills. My name is Tanya. I am currently a program manager with the South Dakota Network Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault. I have about 33 years of experience working with Native American families, mostly on the reservation, but a lot off, in areas from law enforcement, education, counseling, and healthcare. And I was brought on to the network to work specifically with the idea of preventing MMIP and human trafficking when the original Keystone Pipeline was projected to move into the Western South Dakota, where we have very limited resources without a large-scale project. And so I have been doing the work before it was called MMIP, as I'm sure Lily mentioned earlier, in the space of intimate partner violence in the space of intergenerational trauma and in the space of working with victims of violence from all aspects in an attempt to help heal a lot of that trauma. I'm from Laura Brule. I live right up the river right now in Pierre, but my family all still lives down in Laura Brule. I am a mother. My daughter is married and lives in Longmont, Colorado. My son is in law enforcement, works for the Laura Brule Sioux Tribe and lives in Laura Brule. And I'm going to have, I think I can say this now. Mom's the word, but I'm going to be a grandmother in July. So, yeah.
Ooh.
Well, congratulations to you too, Tanya. And thank you both for joining us. I think I'll start out really broadly and just say, what do we need to know as an underpinning for this conversation? What are the current statistics on the MMIP crisis, and what's the South Dakota and the Upper Midwest role in the crisis? And reasons why, for instance, the confluence of two interstates in South Dakota. What impact does South Dakota have on this crisis?
I think we can just kind of converse back and forth, right, Tanya? Because we can kind of collaborate on kind of what we see and what we hear and our involvement, I guess. And since I've been doing this work since 2016, I've kind of seen it evolve as far as the government DC office is kind of getting involved in this, from that level to the state level to the local level. Savannah's Act, I think, was one of the more critical things that was passed in Congress. And at the time that happened, I didn't see much going on, only because that usually happens when the government is involved in something. And so I know that when all of that happened, I had lots of questions about when is this going to happen, what's going on with this, and it's kind of stood still for a really, really long time. Okay, and then evolved from that was the what is it, Tanya? What I'm trying to say, or Stacy? What's the other one? It kind of evolved into what's the other title that they went out and did?
Oh, I know what you're talking about too. No
Yeah,
more. I know
No More
it.
Stolen Sisters.
Well,
One.
Well, they
I'm
did
sorry,
a report
Tanya.
that not one more was the
Yeah.
report.
What's that?
Here.
I don't have any information in front of me because it's been kind of busy for me. No, the Not Invisible Act. That's
Not
where I'm
Invisible
getting.
Act. That's
Not
it.
Invisible Act. Okay.
I drew blank
And
too.
yeah, and so that evolved from Savannah's Act, and it sort of was the same. It was the same. Okay, but at that point, then they started to really gather information from communities across the nation, actually. And so they listened to one of the issues that we had is they weren't listening to the grassroots people. Okay. So really, how do you know what you're going to do if you're not listening to us? And so they had several hearings across the United States. And in fact, we had many of our Red Ribbon Skirt Society women that went to Billings and testified. And so I think what happened is they took Savannah's Act, they turned it into the Not Invisible Act, and then they took that report and then they created things that they needed to be doing. Okay. And I had gone on to see that report today, and I don't know. I think we're still struggling. And one of the things when we're involved with the government, and the government says they're going to do this and that, it comes down to money. It really does come down to money. You hire people to do that, to keep people in those key positions, all of that too. So, and I think maybe Tanya, you can speak some more to that.
Yes. When the Savannah's Act was passed, it was passed without funding. And so it fell to the grassroots folks like Lily and her agency to do more with less, or to do that work without a funding source. And then a lot of the intel that has been collected through the Savannah's Act is law enforcement specific. And so we provide that information to law enforcement, specifically the Department of Justice, but we do not receive the information back on areas that we should be aware of, community members that we should be aware of, or any other intel that they may have that would prevent future crimes. When the Not Invisible Act passed, they created committees, but again, they're grossly underfunded because of how some of these places and some of these programs have been funded. So quick crash course in federal crimes, everybody is assessed $100 special assessment fee. The $100 from every crime, every level in the federal system across the United States. All of that every one of those $100 went into a kitty. And that's what has funded VOCA and VAWA over these years. When COVID happened, a lot of those were waived. And a lot of the folks who had been in prison that were released early, that we were banking on that money, did not have to pay it. So all of these programs now are not funded. And much like Savannah's Act and these other acts that have followed since the Violence Against Women Act, we are desperate for funding. And then without funding, we are not able to provide advocacy, to work with the families of the missing, and to work with the potential victims who we've identified through a lot of criminogenic factors will have the potential to become missing. Another area that South Dakota needs to be mindful of is because of our multi-jurisdictions in our state, we use multi-databases, and the databases do not talk. And so if a tribal agency who is the 638 contract governed by the tribe, they may use X database where the FBI and the BIA will use NCIC, and they don't communicate. And
Right.
the other factor that we need to be mindful of is if they don't fall into the category of elderly, they don't fall into the category of they have a life-threatening medical condition that they need medication that's not with them, and they're not of a young age, there's that gray area of adulthood who have the right to go missing, they have the right to ghost, and they have the right to not return phone calls. And so without something that would kickstart moving it into an alert, we lose those critical hours. I mean, there's shows on all over every channel, 72 hours, 48 hours, those critical moments. But if you're an adult and you don't fall into one of those categories, or there's not like an evidence of an obvious crime scene, they will tend to treat it on the side of they're partying, they took the wrong way home, they stopped at auntie's house, or they're just, they just didn't get to where they were supposed to go, but they're adults and they can. And so I know that we've all seen the phrase, if you see something, say something.
Mhm.
We've also all heard on the flip side of that, well, that's them. That's not me. That's their problem. We report if our biases show up, but we tend to look the other way because of biases. And so I just think we all have a responsibility that if we do truly believe it takes a village to figure out how we are going to be part of that village. What is our role in that village? Do we still know how to be good neighbors? Because if we are good neighbors and we do have a village, then a lot of these violent cases that turn up to be part of the MMIW issue will have been caught by a neighbor, by a friend, or by that village.
I'm glad you brought
And
that up, Tanya, because I went online this morning to just kind of get a glimpse at the statistics as of today. And as of this morning, according to the South Dakota Missing Persons Clearinghouse, there's currently 126 missing persons, 77 of whom are Native American, which is 61%. The oldest case is from February of 1974. And the three oldest cases in the clearinghouse are Native American. But the six most recent, dating up to as recent as yesterday, are all also Native American, and they're also very young. And so I was wondering about what part of that age piece that you were talking about How many more are in there that we don't know about because they're, what you said, like, oh, they're just, they have the right to go missing. So even with the statistics that are on the clearinghouse, where you have, even 71 females right now, and 48 of them are Native American women. And that's 68% of all the women missing in South Dakota are Native American. But then you factor in that piece about the right to go missing. So there's a lot more, I think, behind the statistics that we're not aware of. And then when I think about too, that the issues with the reporting, like they have to be reported. And just so clarify for us, if to be on the South Dakota Missing Persons Clearinghouse, is that reported by law enforcement only? Or how do you get on the South Dakota Missing Persons database?
Yes, you have to report to your local law enforcement, and then they have to enter the data, and they have to enter the data into the website or the area, the place that would see it most. So an example would be when I first got this job and I was really looking into exactly what you just did. I was preparing for a call, so I looked at the clearinghouse. And one of the ladies on the call, on the list, was a gal from Laura Brule, where I'm from, and I had just seen her. And so I called the DCI, the AG's office, said, hey, she's not missing, she's home. And this is 6 years old, and she's now a mama, and she's taking her kids to school. I mean, I saw her at school. And the AG's office said, the law enforcement agency that puts it in is the one who has to take it out. Marty Jackley could have a conversation with her and still not have the authority to remove her from the missing persons database or be the one that entered it, because it has to come from the reporting agency, and it has to be assigned that number. And once it has assigned that number, then it can go other places like NamUs. But for the most part, it has to be the reporting agency where she's from. So I called Laura Brule and said, hey, as you know, she's not missing. But then it takes a minute to find the person who has the credentials to then remove a report from the database. And so there are people on there that shouldn't be. And then there are people who have never made it for a whole host of reasons. A lot of them are where the family member is getting intel from. I'll give you a quick case scenario, and then I'll turn it over to Lily for on her side of it. But there was a case in Pierre where the mom called up here to talk to her daughter. The mom was from Rosebud, and the daughter was working here in Pierre. She had a month-to-month basis apartment, and she brought her boyfriend with her to help babysit the kids. And so mom called back and there was no answer. Mom called again, her phone had been shut off. Mom called the front desk, they transferred the call. It's been months now. And the boyfriend answered and said, they picked her up on a probation violation, she's in jail. So the mom's like, okay, and goes down the line with not hearing from her daughter. Tracks down the boyfriend again and said, when she's getting out, we haven't heard from her. I sent her a letter to the jail. They sent it back. And he said, well, they sent her to prison. She'll be in for a year. And so months go by and she has been trying to reach her daughter at the prison. They finally tell her she's not here. So then the sister does a Facebook social media, where has anyone in Pierre seen my sister? Where's my sister? Coincidentally, a fisherman was out using his new graph, and he sees something in the waters in Pierre below the Legion area, if you're familiar with Pierre. They pulled the car out of the water, and it's the daughter that's been missing. But because they had intel that suggested she was somewhere, the family didn't file a formal missing persons report for a very long time, because they were under the impression she was under the control of the DOC and that they would have absolutely no authority to get a message to her, to be able to see her. They're over 100 miles away without a car. So how would they get here to have for visitation? So they were relying on the intel of somebody else, which puts a huge gap then in statistics, because technically she had been missing for all of those months. The family knew that they weren't getting anywhere, but there were these little pieces of information from a boyfriend or somebody that led them to believe that all was well. And so that's another microcosm in this whole mess of MMIW, is when we can't lay eyes on a relative and they're over 100 miles away, who do we call to help us do a welfare check? Who do we call to make sure that she really is still in Pierre, working, and that he's taking good care of the kids? So Lily, I'll take that. Senator.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge oversight that we've been seeing for years, and I think that's one of the things that the Not Invisible Act is supposed to be putting in place. And, and putting people specifically in the different areas of South Dakota across the country and their communities that's going to be follow up with all of that information, and I know that, the list of missing people at the state office, a police officer will be off for a week. Okay. The girl is found. And so it takes a week for them to call it in, and, even if the police officer knows the case number that's not on duty, why can't they do that? Okay. So it's really kind of holding our system accountable for the work that they really are doing, and I think that stories, and happen, there's too often this happens to our women, and I know that, here in Rapid City, and I just want to say I'm only sharing information from my own experience. I'm not an expert in this. I just want to let people know that, we often do, we have a good relationship, here in Rapid City with our Pennington County Sheriff's Department, Police Department, all of those individuals that, have the capacity to do the searches, to make the decisions, all of those, for our women and our children in our community. And I think sometimes for them as human beings is that if they don't have somebody holding them accountable within their positions to do this work, they're going to kind of let it go and let it slide, and that's part of the work that Red Ribbon Skirt Society is that we do. And that's why we built those relationships with those entities to hold them accountable, to have an email where I have everybody in the email to send out, I got a call from a parent, they're concerned about their child. Can you check into this? So those systems that the Not Invisible Act is supposed to be putting in place, the grassroots organizations are taking that on because they can't wait. They can't wait for somebody to decide, okay, we're going to give this state this amount of money. We'll give that state amount of money. And now we got to hire these people within the community, whether it's tribal or in the urban areas, to do this work, And again, it really does come back to where are the funds to do this? Okay. And as we know, when you are funded by the state or the federal government, you have those ties to them. So you have to be very, very careful how you do your job. You have to answer to those individuals. And that's why, the Red Ribbon Skirt Society, we're just a group of women that we volunteer our time. We're not going to be tied to any of that. If we decide that we're going to do something, we're going to do it. And I think that's one of the pluses. And when I go out and speak to this, there are a lot of groups and organizations that do the work in the area of domestic violence, violence against women, just violence in general. Okay. But at the end of the day, when it's 5 o'clock, their job is done. So they don't go back to it until the next morning or the weekend. The weekends come. And but that's just how life is, And so we hope as a society of women that we're looking beyond that, and we do. I have a lot of our women that their daughters have been murdered. Their daughters have been murdered. And it's working with those women to, to be the matriarchs that they are. And that's what they're doing, showing up in court and holding people accountable, judges accountable, prosecutors accountable, and to be in that space and to hold them again responsible to do the right thing, justice for our people.
And I think that's a big piece of it. I mean, it has to be at the grassroots level. And I want to kind of touch back on something that both of you have mentioned to some degree, the funding piece for sure. And then Tanya, you mentioned that with the jurisdictional complications with the multiple databases that don't communicate with each other. But when I was looking into this and doing a little bit of background research, I confused myself because it also depends legally on like which government entity bears the primary responsibility because of basic differences in federal law. Like depending, for instance, on the Indian status of the offender or the victim, the location of the offense, stuff like that, as to who has primary jurisdictional responsibility. Can you kind of just gloss over that as in a layman's explanation of how complicated that whole issue is? Because I confused myself just trying to figure it out.
Absolutely. In 1886, we had the Major Crimes Act. There were 7 crimes that were on there. It was the creation of the FBI and what they were going to investigate. And those top 7 cases, or those top 7 crimes, are still today what's in the Congress, what they're supposed to investigate. VAWA did not happen until 1994, so the Violence Against Women Act. So from 1886 until 1994, we recognize that all of these Native American women are at the top of across the country of being victims of violence, of being more likely to be murdered, of being more likely to experience a sexual assault. In 2010, President Obama signed in the Tribal Law and Order Act to really just do a deep dive into what is happening here. So the jurisdiction, it's all statute, but it's crazy. And I'll use my own tribe as an example because I lived it. We were allotted lands on the reservation and we were there. And then they decided, well, we have people immigrating here to the United States. They want to farm, we'll give them some land. So next thing you know, we have neighbors that are non-native. And so what used to be a solid piece of land is now a checkerboard. So I could stand at my grandpa's house and then walk 1 block and be within the boundaries of the original reservation on a non-native land. So the sheriff is responsible for that land because it's no longer part of the tribe. And so with what you're talking about with jurisdiction, they have to first determine, is it within the reservation boundaries or federal? And then we have to determine who has then, who was the victim? Were they native or not? And then we have to determine who was the offender. Were they native or not? And then we have to determine, does the crime fall under the 7 Major Crimes Act? And if the answer to that is all yes, and we're in Lower Brule, the call then goes to peer. So we then wait another hour for an FBI response at the quickest, right? I mean, we have to get our keys, get our car and drive down, and then we start the investigation. So the jurisdictional piece is quite something. And my good friend Renee down in Oklahoma, they had an incident happen in the casino. They literally took masking tape and went down the center of the casino. This was federal and this was state. So they had to determine on which side of the masking tape that the alleged crime occurred, and then who then to call in to do the investigation. That continues to happen today. That sounds like Barney Fife kind of things, where how could that happen in this day and age with this technology, with GPS the way that it is, but it continues to happen. We use basically a ruler and a thread to determine where it happened. And so you go back to them to loop it back around to missing persons. Where did she disappear from? And I'm just going to say she because of statistics. Did she disappear from Lower Brule? Or did she disappear from her Walmart trip to Pierre? Did she even make it to Pierre? Did she leave Pierre and make it to the reservation boundary? Who do we call? DCI? Well, they're an assist agency. Do we call the FBI? Well, they're only brought in at the 7 Major Crimes Act, and if it's federal jurisdiction. Do we call Pierre PD? Do we call Hughes County Sheriff? Well, then if we call Hughes, do we have to call Stanley and Lyman? And then ultimately the Bureau of Indian Affairs or Tribal Police. So who does the person call first? And then who then decides where the jurisdiction lies is also a huge issue. Because if, I don't know if Frank Palmersheim is on this call, but he could talk to us about jurisdiction until the next year. And we'll all still walk away saying, wait, now what? Now what if I'm here, right?
Yeah.
So jurisdiction will be a thing.
Right. And that's the thing that many of our families struggle with. They really struggle with. And for individuals like myself and Tanya, they depend on us to navigate through that, because at that point they're pretty angry. And why can't this happen? Or why can't this happen? Why aren't they doing this? So that's part of what we have to kind of navigate through and educate ourselves on. And it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of information that we need to be dealing with, One of the bigger things that has happened, which is pretty positive, from the Not Invisible Act, is the Missing and Murdered Unit. Okay. And they're federal. And so we have Missing and Murder Unit individuals across the United States. And so they are more easily able to go and deal with different MMIW cases because they're federal. They can cross those boundaries, right? And so for us here in Rapid City, we have 2 women that are the Missing and Murdered Unit, and man, are those women on top of it. I was so happy to build a relationship with those 2 women. And so if I have an individual, a family that comes to me and they're having an issue in maybe Nebraska, and actually this has happened, I send a message to Bobby and Savannah to see if they're in that that's their jurisdiction, right? And if it is, because they're feds, they can actively get involved in that. They can actively get involved in cases here in Rapid City. And, the technology that's out there, for cases, for murder cases and evidence, their system is so high tech, more so than investigators in blood samples and all those sorts of things, that on a state level, on a county level, it's nice to have those individuals out there that can say, all right, we're listening to what's going on here. We think it needs to be opened up again, the case. And so they start sending everything out to, the best places that you can possibly have it investigated by, samples, clothing and all those sorts of things. And so I think for our Red Ribbon Skirt Society, and I don't think other groups, their families know that, to be honest with you. I mean, this is an example of at a gas station, I ran into a family. They'd never heard of this before. Okay. So we get back to the Not Invisible Act. There's some responsibilities here that y'all have said that are there. You've gathered this information and this is what you've come up with, but now what are you going to do with it? And that big part of it, I think, is, having individuals, that are hired for each state, and not just one, but a few, that can help handle these cases for us, help do this.
Thank you for that. I want to, this is an interactive program, so I want to open it up now to anybody who has a question or a comment, a suggestion, contribution. What do you guys have to say? Don't be shy. We're all friends here. Anybody? Okay, well, let's continue talking more about the issue. To kind of take a little bit of a different direction here, what are, kind of developing more on what you were talking about, Lily, with the Red Ribbon Skirt Society, what are some of the organizations and programs that are seeking to make a change? And what you guys do at the Red Ribbon Skirt Society, Lily, is phenomenal. And I've noticed there are several other organizations sprouting up in South Dakota. I didn't look nationwide because there are so many, and it's much needed. What are some other programs or initiatives that you guys are aware of?
Well, the thing with the society is we operate as a society of women.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think we probably, are probably only the only society of women that do this work. It's all volunteer. And you proceed differently. Okay, you really do proceed differently. And it's, like I said, it's all volunteer. And a big part of it is having families that are really actually the victims as well, and really building those relationships long term. Okay, long term relationships with those families. So to the point where, for example, one of our mothers who lost her daughter, she has 7 children. Okay, so she left 7 children behind for the mother to raise. Now, as we begin to build those relationships with those families, those are our relatives, and being a good relative. And for us, it's getting back to that. How do you be a good relative? Um, I think sometimes we have a lot of constraints within our organizations. The whole thing of, well, don't get too close to the family. Okay. I mean, that's a huge thing for investigators, and don't get too close to the family. Okay, because you got a job to do. And that's one of the things that we do, we do get close to the family, all those children left behind. Like I shared with you when I walked to Wounded Knee, all those kids walked with me, you know, and so they feel that they're contributing, that they're doing something to remember their mother. So that's going to be something that's going to affect them for a really long time. And then they'll become involved in the society and in the movement, you know. And what's really important for us, and one of the mothers had said, is how do we get our men involved? Okay, because what we have seen, I don't know if I'm getting off track here or not, but what we have seen as a society of women and the families we work with, most of them, the men have murdered our women. Looking back at the cases that we've been involved with and gone to court, it's been our own men that have done this. And so the mother is trying to figure out how do we get like her sons involved? How do we do that? And that was a question that was put out to me when I did a training in Pierre. One of the men from down in Pine Ridge, he goes, well, you how do you do this? And I said, you know what? That becomes your responsibility as a man. You need to figure that out, you know. And I was like, because we can't do it all, we really can't do it all. And so we have to have those men stepping up and to be role models and to work with those young men. How do you treat a woman, because somewhere along the way, and a lot of that is, taking away the responsibility of our Native women as being men as being warriors and providers, and because of colonization, that was taken away from them. And I've been hearing this for years and years and years and years. And so, but it's true. And there needs to be groups of men that can step up to that and take on that responsibility. So, the other groups, that do this work, and I try to do, I really do work with them and try to do work with them. But at the end of the day, they're done at 5. Okay. And, that's why we're trying to recreate that sense of responsibility and how as a society works within our culture. It's really important and critical that we do that.
There is a comment or a question in the chat. It's what do you feel will happen to the funding and VAWA type programs with the new federal administration? Tanya, that's probably right. You're in your wheelhouse.
Well, with any account, when you've lived off the interest and then you drain it to the bottom, it's going to take years and years and years to replenish that. And the account that we had been drawing off of and using to fund these programs across the United States has never been where it's at. It's never been this low. Secondly, there are states around the United States that have taken a huge responsibility in helping fund victim services to the millions and millions of dollars that we write grants for. And Lily is wonderful in that she's figured out how to do this without federal grants. That's what we rely on is federal grants for victim services across South Dakota to fund the advocacy positions, to fund the violence programs, to teach some of these prevention programs that Lee has spoke to on how do we get our men involved. I do not see these programs being funded like they have been. I see huge change on how things are going to be done in the future. I've fortunately living in Pierre for as long as I have, I'm great friends with our elected officials that are on the state level. And I don't know if you guys would be shocked to know this low amount, or if this is an amount that you think is a good amount. But the state of South Dakota, through legislation, like earmarked dollars, is $225,000 a year. That's it. We have fought in appropriations for other funds and have been awarded like one-time money here and one-time money there when our budget was strong. But I've already been told, do not expect those kinds of things this year. And so we have had agencies where the executive director is the business manager, who's also the advocate who shows up at night when someone needs something, who does the on-call things. And as far as that, which leads me into the question about agencies across South Dakota, what we're seeing as, instead of being a domestic violence shelter in Pierre, the domestic violence shelter is also working with victims of sexual assault, victims of human trafficking, women who had been missing, who got out because there was an arrest of the defendant, the offender, and she was able to share, hey, I'm a missing person from Montana. I haven't seen my family in 3 years. And so we've really had to look at having one agency that was designed to work with family violence become able to work with sexual assaults, human trafficking, and someone who had been missing for 3 years. And we don't have what we need in South Dakota. We don't have the advocates that we need in South Dakota. And I don't know if anyone on this call knows victim. The term victim is a legal term. And the only way that you can be determined to be a victim is if law enforcement and your state's attorney believes that there was a crime that was committed to make that person a victim. So for all of those cases where the case was declined, someone didn't report, but they're seeking services, they're not reimbursed to that agency. They're basically being done free will. The hospital's not being reimbursed for those injuries. It's a write-off. So we are grossly underfunded in this state, and with no funding comes lack of services, and without those services, there's not going to be a report. And so it's very much like Kevin Costner says, if we build it, they will come. If we have the services, we will have a better representation of what's happening in our state. Right now, there's very small groups that are trying to capture data, but data is a whole nother issue. There's a sovereignty issue with data. And so if it's not collected by somebody that the DOJ deems appropriate, it doesn't count. If it's not collected by somebody the state government deems appropriate, it doesn't count. And so then there's this, well, who's actually knows what's going on outside of the grassroots folks who hear it, live it, breathe it. How do we even truly know what's happening if you won't accept our data or our spreadsheet or the word of our advocates, since they're not victims because there's not a crime attached to their services?
Right, and that's a big part of the whole data collection, with the Not Invisible Act. If you go to the Not Invisible Act and Google it and you go on there, that's one of the priorities. Well, it's not a priority. I think it's number 4, data collection. And so it's kind of like you have to have an entity that's going to say, we have the right information. Okay. When sometimes they don't. I mean, the information and the data, we tried to do data before. We just couldn't do it. It was just too overwhelming. And so, we decided our priorities need to be those families. Let somebody else take care of that data, because it was impossible. And I think I have a couple of women online here that were trying to help do that. It was impossible to do, And so, but as we know, you know, it's all about data at that level for funding as well, you know. So there's always Big Brother behind is the driving force to our outcomes. Okay. And so we as the grassroots people, and everybody's a grassroots person, you know, everybody's a mom, everybody's worried about their kids, their grandparents, fathers, you know, we're all grassroots, you know. But we have to survive in the system, however that happens, you know. And there's all those things, you know, and sovereignty, you know, because our nations want to be sovereign. They really do, and they try their best to be sovereign. But when it comes to, you know, our missing, our relatives and our people and our women, there has to be some give and take there, you know. I mean, feds can walk into anywhere, but if it has to be determined, does this go to the feds? Okay. And I know that there are some agreements between, you know, for example, Pennington County and some of the tribes. There are agreements that yes, you can come in, you can help us, you know, find a MMIW or missing person. So they have those agreements. They can go back and forth. But I know that there are tribes that don't, and they don't want it because they want to be sovereign. And I get that, but I feel that everybody needs to be working together. You know, everybody really does need to be working together when they start looking for somebody. You know, I know a couple of cases that, you know, no, you're not going to come over here and you're not going to search on our reservation. And then I also know cases, yes, please come here and help us find this missing person. Okay. So there's a lot of inconsistencies, you know, within our state, for whatever reason. And I can say honestly that some of those disagreements and not working coming together. When I was doing my walk, I felt that, you know, here I am, a Lakota woman with my sweat dress on and, you know, walking down the road, you know, and shoot, I felt that felt I wasn't safe at times. Okay. And so that exists in our state. It really does. And I felt that when I was just walking, you know. And so we need to take a look at that and talk about relationships, and can we all be related? Can we have those good relationships, you know, to help all of our people, because I know in instances when I'm presenting to a non-native group, they're looking at me like, we didn't know this. Okay. Well, they don't want to know it. So I have to take it back and use examples. As grandparents in the room or mothers in the room, what would you do if your daughter went missing? The other part of the Not Invisible Act is media. I think media is number one. You know, are they paying attention to our indigenous people, our Lakota women? You know, and that's kind of been out there for many, many years, and that's one of the priorities within that Not Invisible Act. And I know it's still not happening. Okay. Again, you need to have somebody that's going to focus on that. So you really need, you know, a group of individuals that can come together, and they are going to focus on MMIP. And that's what the Not Invisible Act is supposed to be providing.
There is a statute that already exists to allow these multi-jurisdictions to come together and do an investigative coordination. And much like what Lily's been speaking of, the Not Invisible Act, it's created that commission, which is basically an MDT or a large body of gathering of all of the different disciplines to come together. We already had that in the books. It's 25 USC section 289. But South Dakota and every other, I'll just throw it out there. We're not unique in that we have biases in law enforcement. We have a very big confusion on who has jurisdiction and who doesn't. And oftentimes they'll say, well, that's a Laura Brule issue when it's a Lyman County or a Stanley County issue. And then we have this like muddiness until we figure out what really happened. And so until we can really look the fact that we've got the statutory ability to come together to do these investigative coordinations, to share information, to share that intel, to not have it be, well, if you haven't went through Artesia, New Mexico's law enforcement course, you can't read this report that your advocate provided to us, even though your advocate told us, and then be a viable person to help in this investigation. So in my opinion, a lot of times with these calls, we come on and we give you very bleak situations. We talk about the confusion. We talk about the jurisdiction. People always want action items. Well, what should we do? What can we do? What's a fix for this? And this is, in my opinion, from working in the multidisciplines that I have. I'm not speaking on behalf of Laura Brule. I'm not even speaking on behalf of the network right now. I'm speaking on behalf of Tanya's lens. Multidisciplinary teams work if you have the right people at the table. And if there's any executive directors on this call, I apologize in advance for what I'm about to say, but what I'm about to say is this. Your email should not just go to the executive director. Oh, Christina comes off. Your email should go to the people that are boots on the ground.
Right,
And so
right.
while my executive director, Krista, should be able to funnel the email to the person that should get it, and that doesn't always happen. Your email, your people at the table need to be well thought out. You need to be mindful about who's at that table. Every unattended death that we have in Indian country needs a review. And I'll tell you why. If there's an unattended death in Indian country, it automatically slides over into the FBI need to have a look at it, and there probably should be an autopsy. And we do not have forensic pathologists like they do on TV. A forensic pathologist is trained to basically go for the first possible thing if it's not glaringly obvious. And I went rounds with AUSAs about this. Back when I was in college, back when I was in grad school, they have this idea that if you're a 0.40 alcohol, you're probably going to die. But if we've all read any of the scanner sites today, you'll read that people are driving in South Dakota at 0.5, right? They're not dead. They're actually still making a conscious decision to drive a car. But if you get the toxicology report that looks like that, they're going to assume it's an accidental death due to a substance abuse, despite the fact that we've got trauma somewhere else. And then we close the case on this murdered, that the whole community knows has been murdered. The witnesses that were present, the community members who were in the know that foul play happened. But toxicology, maybe they were 0.40, maybe they were 0.30, but there might be some meth too. Well, this might be lethal, so it must be accidental. We need a better review of those unattended deaths to really determine how many murdered cases we have. Second, intimate partner violence review. We as a country are not doing what we need to do with intimate partner violence. We are not protecting our families from violence in a way that we should. We have no problem barging in when it comes to truancy. We have no problem barging in when it comes to unpaid taxes. But we have a huge problem barging in if someone's throwing fists at home. And I will never be able to wrap my brain around the rationale behind that. But once we start getting those calls, though, we need a review. Because if you have a conversation with Tanya, who's working with advocates, and Lily, who's in the community, and a school resource officer, and we say one name, guaranteed, we all three know that name, and we know that they need resources, but we're not doing a very good review when it comes to outside the people doing the direct services. And lastly, when we start talking about people that need to be always at the forefront of these conversations, we need all of our jurisdictions there. We can't have the FBI speaking on behalf of Laura Brule. We can't have the BIA speaking on behalf of Laura Brule. We need all of our jurisdictions there. We need all of those folks that are there, to include our advocates and those prosecutors that are seeing those cases that are coming into tribal court that aren't making it to the federal jurisdiction. And then my last thing is, for those of you who don't know, there's usually about a 5-year statutory limitation before a case, once a case is handed over to the AUSA's office, Assistant United States Attorney's Office, before they have to close the case or prosecute it. They got about 5 years to investigate. We're taking those 5 years. And so because then all of the discovery information that was done at the tribal level is turned over, we aren't able to pursue them tribally and exercise sovereignty because the information to prosecute the case is in the hands of the DOJ. So are they using those 5 years in a good way? Are they throwing all the resources to solve this case? Or are we just ticking the time to say, you know what, we did our due diligence. We're sorry, we're going to decline to prosecute this case. So this, in my opinion, a fix would be a multidisciplinary team that has the authority to review these cases at the table and provide the information that we need to support our families and that they need to prosecute these cases, and then figure out whatever it is to make the two databases talk. If Google can hear this conversation and send me something in 20 minutes about something that I've said, I do not understand how our databases cannot share that Jennifer went missing between Chamberlain and Brookings. I could go on until Martin Luther King Day if you let me, so I'll just
and we are getting ready to bump up against that 1 o'clock end of lunch break time frame. So I sincerely want to thank you ladies for joining us today. This has been incredibly informative, and we all have a role in making sure this doesn't fall, get swept under the carpet. It's incredibly important. It's incredibly timely. And I thank you for joining us. And thank you to everybody who's joining us today as guests. I do want to let you know, in a couple of weeks, on the 16th of January, we are going to meet again here at the cafe and David Adler will be joining us. He's a constitutional scholar, president of the Alturas Institute, and he has a weekly column on our Humanities Council website. We're going to talk about the Constitution, the current socio-political climate in relation to the Constitution. What are we looking at? The inauguration is going to be on the 20th, and he's going to join us on the 16th, and we're going to have a really good conversation. So I hope you guys can join us then. In the meantime, thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Lily. Much thanks to you for all the work that you do. I hope to see everybody again in a couple of weeks. And in the meantime, have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy New Year.